Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari.
And I'm Garrett Eberhardt.
And what movie are we going to overanalyze this week?
This week we are overanalyzing Vice.
So Vice is written and directed by Adam McKay, and it stars Christian Bale as Dick Cheney, and it's basically a biopic of Cheney as he follows his desire to become the most powerful vice president in America's history. What did you think?
I really liked it.
You did not.
I did. I really liked it. I came home and I immediately...
Oh, controversy.
I immediately wrote like 600 words of my review, like as soon as I got home. I had a lot to say about it. I felt like it was a good primer and succinct summary of not just the rise of Dick Cheney and the circumstances surrounding the Iraq War with the Bush administration, but it really drew a straight line of the formation of the modern conservative movement. Technically, it had some issues, which I'm sure we'll get into, but story-wise and narratively, I really liked it.
Wow, I could not disagree more. I really disliked it. I just thought it was so poorly made and such a terrible idea. And I really love the fact that Adam McKay thinks that he could even come close to mimicking one of literally the greatest living authors of our time. But frankly, like, you're not Michael Lewis. You do not know how to tell this story. Like, Michael Lewis is Michael Lewis because his genius is in pulling together just a couple of threads of a story, backstorying each of those threads, and then showing how woven together they create a big picture issue. That's what makes Michael Lewis, and how he can tell a story like The Big Short, which I thought Adam McKay did a brilliant job making a movie of. But then when he had to write it himself, I was like, how did this drunken lout who got thrown out of college end up a congressional intern?
You don't think they made that case?
No. They make him dumb, and then all of a sudden he's smart and strategic, and I'm like,
Well, he latched on to someone powerful as, an intern, and...
But how did he even get to be an intern? How does he, restart his life, go back to college? You're showing that he has failing grades, and then all of a sudden he's, this brilliant, strategic person, and I'm like, the through thread on that is that apparently Lynn, his wife, is, earbud in his ear all the time, because you've only presented her as the smart one thus far. So...
Well, I thought they they summed it up with, her whole soliloquy towards him saying that, she's looking for a man to provide, and it touched on the gender politics of the day.
That was so on the nose. What a terrible speech. Well, I'm a woman and I can't do it, so you need to do it.
That's real, though. It's
real, but a moment of subtlety, if you will.
And so, I think I got the gist of it. Okay, he was given this ultimatum, so, he shaped up. He obviously had the potential from the fact that he got into Yale, period, without having all those connections. He just needed to get his life together. And, I didn't need them to actually show a montage where, he dries out and he's sitting in the class and raising his hand, oh, he's engaged now. Okay, I got it.
I didn't need a montage, but you can't keep telling me how dumb he is and what a poor student he is. And then, he's suddenly astute, and I just thought that just didn't... I couldn't connect the picture we started with anything that followed.
Well, was that the point? Was that one of the points that the film is making, that he is a mediocre student and doesn't have much behind him, but he still attained these heights career-wise, and it's a statement on an issue in America of white mediocrity always rising to the top, where, even though you don't have much going for yourself, just having that privilege allows you to reach heights that other people can't. So is that a point that they're making? Possibly.
I honestly think the number one point that I came away with from this movie would probably extremely distress Adam McKay, which is that for whatever else he did in his life, that man loved the women in his life. He seems to truly have loved his wife, and he sacrificed his own political career for his daughter, and the only person he was willing to sell his daughter out for was his other daughter.
That's not what I took from it at all.
Oh, I was just like, they present him like his daughter comes out and he's like, that's cool. I still love you. I was like, man, but seems to be like a really great dad and husband.
No, I think one of the themes of it, other than it being an analysis of modern American politics, was it's a character study of the blind ambition that both he and Lynn had. So, yeah, he protected his daughter at first and sacrificed his career. But, once his career was over and the only way the Cheney legacy and hold onto power was going to survive was for Liz to get elected, he threw her under the bus, him and Lynn. And it stayed faithful to their blind ambition and their thirst for power that they had.
I mean, yeah, you could read it that way, and that's certainly the case they were trying to make, but it seemed to me like the only person, again, he was willing to ever sacrifice his daughter for was for his other daughter, and she was like, I need this to win, and yeah, that's how the movie writes it, but to me, I'm like, that doesn't really hold water,
so you think
in the story that you've actually presented.
Yeah, I think your feelings on that are going to come to what you think his motivations were. I don't think it was, so I didn't look at it as him sacrificing one daughter for the other. I look at it as him saying, okay, if the Cheney family is going to stay as powerful as it has been, she has to go. I can't keep this up anymore. And he willingly threw her under the bus, him and his wife, which, the daughter said on the phone, I know that Lynn wouldn't have done this without you two's approval. I
Liz.
Thought that was...
Sorry,
Liz.
The daughter is Liz, the wife is Lynn.
Okay. I didn't know... I know that Liz wouldn't have done that without you two's approval, and I thought that I was the concrete line, as Dick said earlier in the film. And, it just showed that, their thirst for power that's the.
Yeah, I want to circle back of that, because that's really kind of the heart of what this movie's about. But there's a lot of movie stuff that I want to get through. It was gimmicky, and it was too gimmicky. There were too many different things. And another reviewer pointed out it worked in The Big Short because you needed a break to be here's what a very complicated financial instrument is. I didn't need a break to explain all the things the Bush administration did, the Patriot Act and torture. No, if you say the Patriot Act, I know what that is. So it was the breakout parts to explain stuff that wasn't really very hard to understand were completely unnecessary. And I thought just a detraction from the movie.
Yeah, the editing, when I said that I had technical issues that I'm sure we would talk about, I guess that time is now. Yeah, the editing and the frenetic cuts and switches and the scene itself, and then, okay, I'm going to go back and explain, what the unitary executive power was or whatever. That was a little jarring. So that's, I feel where the issues with the film came from, technically.
The crosses back to the past were always in inopportune moments. Mm-hmm. He just didn't really know how to tell this narrative. And I think he should not write another movie. It was him kind of run amok, and I don't think it was a great success. The thing that's going to be on everybody's mind, of course, as we're coming into Oscar season, is the performances. Mm-hmm. So, A+1,000,000 to Christian Bale.
Yeah, very transformative. He really became Cheney.
He got it. And that way he takes a breath and does the speech, to then fail to Steve Carell. He was nothing like Rummy at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And I was let me double check myself and go back and watch some YouTube video. I was yeah, he just didn't even try. Was he trying to do an impression? He's a comedian. I just couldn't. I was this is I think when we get to sort of the storyline aspect and the motivations and what people were doing, Steve Carell's performance was a huge attraction from the movie, because for me, it was really hard to stay in that moment of, this is the Bush White House, because the dissonance of him trying to be Rumsfeld was so far off the mark. Mm-hmm. It kept pulling me out. The woman who played Condoleezza Rice, though, holy crud, was she a dead ringer?
You think so?
She looked a lot unfortunately not as pretty, I would say. Mm-hmm. What did you think of Tyler Perry?
It's serviceable. It didn't take me out of the movie oh, that's Tyler Perry. Okay, it was believable enough, but there was nothing to write home about. Carell...
I mean, I thought it was competent. Yeah, serviceable is fine.
Yeah. Carell, you're right, he didn't really transform himself into Rumsfeld, and I don't know how much of that is just directly attributable to his performance, or how much of it was because he's juxtaposed against Christian Bale, who basically turned into like a Dick Cheney clone. So if he wasn't standing next to people who had transformed themselves so well, I wonder if people would be as harsh on his performance. That's just.
I mean, when you play a real person, especially one we've seen in the media a lot, you kind of open yourself up to that. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I don't know anything about Lynn Chaney, so I couldn't even remotely critique Amy Adams in that role.
But she did well.
I mean, she always does well. I thought another review I read described Sam Rockwell's George Bush as like the Saturday Night Live version, and I kind of have to agree. It was a little over the top for me. I was like, he should have nailed this, but it was a little bit too broadly an impersonation.
For me, he sounded fine as Bush, but I think the problems I had with it was the writing. Like, Bush is a bumbling idiot, but I wonder if they like took it over the top, like just making him completely a manipulated puppet. And like, you know, there was some truth in their depiction of him, but like, I just wonder if they just took it a little too far to the extreme.
Exactly. Like
he was being manipulated by Cheney, and, you know, he was just someone who was installed in there unworthily, but like, was it that bad?
I sincerely doubt it. Like, he definitely had a folksy charm, but I mean, I remember like back in the day, Molly Ivins, who was honestly one of his harshest critics and had been following him from his governorship in Texas, even she was like, dang, when you meet him though, like, he's a hell of a nice guy. Mm-hmm. Like, people just never had bad things to say about him personally. We talked about this when we talked about how everybody, even the people closest to Trump, are like, that dude's a jerk. Like, no one has anything good to say. Like, no one would say bad things, and people would always say, like, yeah, he does the folksy charm stuff. He's not as stupid as he seems. Like, I don't think they tried to get to the truth of what they were trying to do. I think Bush was seriously misunderestimated. They made him a caricature of himself. And again, that doesn't service the story.
Yeah, I would say he had a little bit more say in the things that went on. They got it right generally.
Or like was knowingly distant. It wasn't like he was like, so there's a difference between me saying to you, hey, you have my tacit approval to do things that I need to not know about. Mm-hmm. And me being like, you're doing what? Like, there's a huge difference there. And I think Bush was actually more of the former. Like, I think he knew that he wanted to keep his distance and to keep his hands clean. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, so anything else on the movie front? The score was a little bit much as well.
I didn't notice the score.
Okay, really? It was kind of in your face, especially like the heartwarming family moments, which was intentional. It was meant to be somewhat satirical. Comic. Yeah, but it was just like
I love this the satire with the middle of the movie credit scene where they're like, oh, and they retired off to live happily ever after. I didn't have a problem
with that either. To raise golden retrievers.
I thought that was clever to really hammer home how Cheney was removed from everything before being pulled back into it by the run for president. Yeah,
although I did think, like, they never show him work at Halliburton ever. Mm-hmm. And the entire time he's at Halliburton that you're aware of, he's working on other political things. And you're like, did he go to the office? Like, how did he run this company?
Well,
like, again, it's just like, it shows such a weirdly skewed version. Like, you never get a sense of the whole picture.
But to defend Adam McKay, they say that, movies are just life with the boring parts cut out. So, like, the same thing with him transitioning from a drunk dropout to a congressional intern. Like, do we really need to see him like going into the office and sitting at a desk with Halliburton?
You would like to have, yes, actually. Because again, you're like, is he smart? Can he do things? Like, it would have been nice to see him in a different setting to contrast against that, or not contrast against what he was like politically. Like, I do actually think you needed that. Much less than I needed constant flashbacks to some drunk drive. Oh, and also, like, it's been a long time, but apparently it's still too soon for me to see any footage of 9/11. That was pretty upsetting for me. I don't know how other people took it, but I'm like, nope, I'm not ready. Started crying again. I was like, nope, don't want to see it. So then the last big piece of controversy was the scene in the credits. They have this focus group in the beginning of the movie, or in the middle of the movie, where they're test marketing, calling the estate tax the death tax and that type of stuff to convince people to vote against their self-interest. And so then they have the same panel of people, and this one guy is calls another guy a libtard, and then he's like, the orange Cheeto you have, and they get in a huge fight.
Yeah, it was them arguing about the movie itself, and saying the guy in the Buccaneers jersey, the conservative guy, said this is liberal propaganda, and another guy said no, it isn't. And he's like, well, you're a libtard, and
he's like, this is facts.
Yeah, and then they got into a fight, and there's a young lady in the room who's watching them, and then she makes a remark about something she can't wait to see. Was it like a concert?
The Fast and the Furious.
Oh yeah, she's like, I can't wait to see that. I thought it was good. I mean, a lot.
Really? Because it was kind of a slam against millennials.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I liked about the movie, and the point of it, and why I think it's getting trashed by critics is because anytime you put a mirror up to the American people, you make them look at themselves, they get mad. And yes,
that's not why we hate it.
Yes,
this is so good. I'm so ready for this fight. I didn't think it was going to happen. Yes. The part of the reason why that administration rose to power, and which I'm glad McKay touched on with Dick Cheney's final monologue when he said, "I'm here because you chose me, and I did what you wanted me to do." So yes, that end credit scene was a statement on the fact that these people end up in these positions because the American people put them there. We live in a representative democracy where our elected officials are a reflection of the populace that voted them in there. So if they're there, they're a reflection of you. And yes, you deserve some blame for the Bush administration. All of us do. That's the way the representative democracies work. They were voted in there. It wasn't a coup. The military didn't storm. I voted for
Congress.
Bradley. I don't deserve any of this. Not only did I didn't even vote for Gore. I was still a registered Democrat at that point, and I voted for Bradley.
It wasn't a military coup. They were voted in there. Same with Cheeto, with Trump.
Yeah, but he lost by 3 million votes is a pretty big difference, yes, in the representative democracy, but that's off topic. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the Bush administration, because and what all this movie was about, and the thing it was trying to portray, and what I think that it just totally gets wrong about this. So I was a baby adult. I was an adult. I did get to vote in the 2000 election. I was not in the country when it went down. So interestingly, I have no idea what that felt like to go through the whole thing, because I was teaching English in Japan, and I was like, someone just tell me when it's over. I didn't have a doubt in my mind that Bush was going to win. I wasn't stressed. I didn't think I just knew he was going to win. Because I think that the run for president is basically a popularity contest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was 15 at the time, so I didn't vote, obviously, in that election. But I've always paid a little more attention to politics than the average person. I don't want to say what I do on the podcast, but I do work in politics, and it involves federal agencies and elected officials. So I've always been interested in that. So I paid attention, even though I couldn't vote, and I remember it well. The Brooks Brothers riot, all that stuff. Yeah.
So they portray Rumsfeld in particular, and then Cheney along with him. There's this whole scene where they're like, well, what do we believe in? And Rumsfeld just laughs and says nothing.
Well, he doesn't even say nothing. He doesn't respond.
Yeah,
he says, what do we
laughs.
believe in?
And so the whole movie, as you pointed out, is just a movie about naked ambition.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't disagree with that point of view more. I don't think this was a movie about... I don't think the history bears out that it was naked ambition. I don't think the history bears out that Rumsfeld just would have laughed in that situation. He knew what he was doing, and he was doing something purposeful and with intent, and it wasn't just about having power. I don't agree. They were trying to create a world. To say that Cheney and Rummy and all the rest of them, especially Wolfowitz, who was a total true believer, weren't running their foreign policy off of this deep belief that they were somehow going to remake the world in America's image. It's just completely false. Like, there's nothing to bear that out. And there's a lot of evidence on the other side about what they were trying to do. Now, they were 100% wrong. Like, Iraq was a really stupid idea and a terrible mistake. And it was, as pointed out, like, evident at the time that this was a bad idea. But the idea that they had no purpose to what they were doing, it just doesn't resonate.
I would agree with that. Yeah, you're right. They didn't just
you're supposed to disagree.
Right. No, they didn't just want power for power's sake. They did try to build power for themselves, but there was an end there. Like, power was the means to an end, and like you said, the end was to restructure the world in a way that they saw fit, both in terms of foreign policy and domestically, being greedy and getting their hands on money for them and the rich pals. So there was an end there, and like you said, they more presented it as to like power being the ends, and that wasn't it at all. So I agree. Yeah,
I mean, I think privilege was the end, and I do. I mean, so. You know, like a lot of people talk about the Halliburton connections and KBR and all the no-bid contracts and all that stuff, which came up in the movie. But, like, ooh, Scooter Libby got off light in this movie, didn't he? Like, I was like, wow, there wasn't even an end roll credit about Scooter Libby? Like, that seemed a little... Right. I was like, how do you leave that all out of this story? Like...
Yeah, and, like, it's extremely subtle, but they're trying to say... and warn that, you know, the atmosphere that was set up by the Bush administration could be taken advantage of, if not by the Trump administration, by some other future nefarious administration. So, like, they could have made that point very well when they talk about Scooter Libby and how he went to jail but was eventually pardoned.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, make that connection to what Trump is doing now with pardoning anybody that's, you know, convicted surrounding the Russia thing. So, yeah, that's a... opportunity they missed.
Yeah, it was such a weird... I was like, it was such a weird thing to leave out. But again, like, I'm not sure that it fits the narrative. It also, like, becomes an issue to me because, well, you're in politics. I'm not in politics, as we all know, but I do live in DC. Like, I just think that it fundamentally, like, misrepresented kind of a little bit how politics work. Like, he didn't really understand the connections between the White House, the executive branch, and the agencies, and where Congress came in. And there was very little Congress. It was like, oh, Fox News is driving things. And I'm like, there were Congress people that were... like, I just didn't think he really understood the source material. I think that's what it comes down to. He told a story, and I was like, I don't think you really understood all the intricacies of this entire story. And then you made a movie and you plucked out a few things and it just didn't come together as for the people who lived it and were like, no, this was a very rich tapestry of things. And you...
Yeah, like he touched on Dennis Hastert a little bit. And I like he threw in the former wrestling coach thing, which if you're familiar with Dennis Hastert, you know what that was a reference to.
Yeah.
But yeah, he didn't, like, he could have gone into the role that Newt Gingrich played in the Gingrich Revolution.
I was like, where's Newt Gingrich in this whole story? Like, you're going to throw like Roger Ailes out there?
Right, that was huge with the conservative movement.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what I mean. And it's so, like, kind of circling back, sorry to interrupt you, like, by leaving out Newt Gingrich, like, he kind of throws out the Koch brothers and creating Heritage Foundation, all this stuff. But when you leave out Newt Gingrich, when you leave out all of that stuff, again, then you get to paint the story of just, naked ambition and not ideology.
Yeah. That's
and true. I think ideology was at play. And the reason that I'm really stuck on this point is because I think Trump really is just not even ambition. Enrichment. Like, I don't even think he cares about the power. He just wants the dang money. Like, he believes in nothing. He really didn't come in with a policy agenda other than, I guess, building a wall.
Right.
And you're like, no, these people were trying to reshape the world, and they were remarkably successful because they had a vision of how they wanted to mess up America.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one of the things that's very topical right now, I've gotten into huge arguments with a friend of mine about, like, who was worse for the federal government, Reagan or Bush? And it's like, they're just both bad. You know, like, Reagan started it, Bush just sort of continued it, of, like, hamstrung and crippling the government. And one of the things but the big thing that Bush did was start to outsource everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
They wanted contractors. And they sold you this bill of goods that contractors were going to be cheaper, and they are definitively not. There's a million and three studies that it's cheaper to just hire a federal worker to do the work. But it was a way to drum up cash in business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was a cronyism issue.
Right.
But here's the problem. The government is shut down. Possibly, most likely, the federal workers who are skipping paychecks at the holidays when most people have just spent a huge chunk of change are probably going to get back pay. But the contractors aren't. Most of them do not get back pay. And we've laid off a whole bunch of people for what? What? They're not even trying to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, and I think that he's trying to tell the story of freaking Paul Ryan, who was Mr. Deficit Hawk until he wasn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just, like, expose Paul Ryan as being the ultimate hypocrite. Like, he clearly didn't care about the deficit at all.
Right.
And so it's a great commentary on this administration. I think it's extremely poor commentary on the Bush administration.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, they could have touched on the ideology a little more, other than it just being, like, straight about the financials. Like, they touched on that being an ends. But, yeah, about the reshaping of the world and stuff, they didn't really touch on that. And I wonder if it's because a lot, at least in terms of foreign policy, a lot of liberals believe the same thing, so they couldn't touch on that, like, as far as the reshaping of the world. You know, I mean, it's not like when we switch to a Democratic administration, like, our interference in all these foreign affairs stop. Like, they keep going. So he couldn't really single out the Bush administration if he went into the reshaping of the world part, because Democrats participate in that too. So I'm wondering if that was a reason why maybe he didn't go more into that aspect of it. I mean, because, like, you know,
Obama campaigned on closing Guantanamo. He did.
True, he did. But he didn't because of Congress more so than any want to.
I mean, the Supreme Court was like, shut it down, and somehow it's still open.
Because Congress blocked him. But that's, like, a whole complicated thing.
Yeah. Foreign policy is not my area of expertise, you might have noticed. But yeah, that goes in part to, like, what I was talking about with, you know, I didn't have a problem with him calling out the American people on this. And, you know, a lot of critics that have trashed the movie, that's been their big complaint. Like, why do you have to call out the American people? I mean, you know, because post 9/11, and I'll talk about this in my recommendations at the end of the podcast. Like, you know, a lot of people were on that train with the Bush administration as far as, you know, going around and cracking heads. Like when the guy in the Bucks jersey said, you know, somebody has to pay, I want to bomb somebody. Like, you know, a lot of people were on that train, liberals included. And so everybody was. It was horrifying.
Right. And so, like,
it was absolutely frightening, the ease with which we sold away our civil liberties.
And that would happen again now, too, as an aside. Like, you know, if there's a terrorist attack now, a lot of these resistors would bend the knee towards Trump and be like, well, we have to support him. He's a president. So, you know, keep that in mind, too.
I don't know. That's a really good question. Like, have we learned our lesson at all? Have we learned anything from this experience?
No, that's
that's it.
That was my big takeaway on, like, what I really liked about the film. On Facebook a month or two ago, I talked about how there's a need for, you know, a political writer more astute than myself to draw a straight line from 9/11 to Trump, and how the choices that America made in the panic following that terrorist attack directly led to his rise. So the embrace of authoritarianism in law enforcement post 9/11, where all first responders and police officers were to be worshipped as gods. That is, you can draw a straight line from that attitude to Ferguson and Baltimore and all these murders we see on the street where cops can murder someone if they feel like it, and everyone says, oh, you can't question them. That's a direct consequence of 9/11. Or you can talk about the embrace of the military-industrial complex and how we spent, what is it, like $2 trillion now in overseas wars post 9/11?
But Eisenhower's been warning us about that since the 50s.
It goes before that, but after 9/11, it was really ramped up, and as we just talked about, everybody was on board. And so, things like that, the embrace of authoritarianism and using all of our dollars on overseas foreign wars, people haven't learned anything. And that's, a lot of the people that are, talking, all this trash about Trump, they were right there waving their flags on September the 12th. 2001, talking about, how we need to do all these things. And, they created the environment that they now decry. And I thought that was, something that I think the film really laid out well. And that's probably part of the reason why I like it, because it's something, I've believed for a while. And I'm like, why is nobody pointing this out? It's obvious. I feel the film, really did that.
That's interesting. I suppose I don't disagree. We are a product of our past in that sense, but and as a sidebar, literally my favorite Onion headline ever came out during the Bush administration because they were very anti-immigrant as well. There was a whole lot of anti-immigrant talk during the Bush administration, particularly coming out of the Department of Justice. And so when Ashcroft left and Gonzalez came in, there was a big headline in the Onion that was Ashcroft loses job to Mexican. Because Mexicans taking our job was the theme at the time. And I was like, oh God, you guys nailed it. That was so funny.
Well, yeah, America really embraced bigotry post, 9/11 and, the way we treated Muslims and stuff. And so once terrorism cooled down as a hot topic, that hatred for minorities had to go somewhere. And as we've seen, it's really transferred over to the other brown people, Latinos. And that's what I'm talking about, the choices that America made post 9/11 on who they wanted to be and how they would respond to that terrorist attack. Straight line to Trump and everything we see now.
But I think there's a couple threads that I'll pull out from there. And I got to stop using the word thread. I've beaten this analogy to death. I apologize. Sorry, everybody. One, the vision for America that bankrupts everybody in favor of the rich. Inequality creates a ton of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And the shift of money is, to me, one of the biggest reasons to how we got where we are. And I remember saying to somebody, and I think I've said this on another episode, where they were talking, I was like, it creates violence.
Mm-hmm.
And someone was like, yeah, I'm really afraid for the, for the future. And I was like, how many mass shootings have we had?
Right.
The future is now. You think that's not a result?
Yeah.
You think this climate isn't creating someone taking a gun?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a 1-to-1 mapping? Right. No, but I 100% believe no, we're already at that, at the violent future. So I think that's one thing. And, I'm an economist, so I'm going to look at it from that perspective, of course. But I also think for better or for worse, Obama is a huge part of this. I just don't think you can take out of the equation having a Black president and the effect of that.
Oh, totally.
On so many people. And this is just an awkward thing to say. It's not I think that Obama shouldn't have been president or we shouldn't have had our Black president, but it did create a tide of racial resentment stemming from it.
No, it definitely did. And I would say that, is intertwined with what I said about America's embrace of bigotry, where it was okay to hate groups as a whole post 9/11. Because why wouldn't you hate Muslims? They attacked our country. And so that seed being planted created that environment where a Black president would be elected and people would have this great racial resentment. So they're intertwined. You're correct.
Yes.
One other link to the past that I thought the movie really made me think of and, touched on something that I believe, and it's the lack of punishment for white criminality and for traitors. And I think this is a problem that America created post-Civil War, where the Confederate traitors, there weren't mass hangings when there should have been, but they were just allowed to integrate back into society. And following the collapse of Reconstruction, those people who weren't adequately punished were allowed to formulate Jim Crow, and they created state-sponsored terrorism that lasted for over 100 years. And I feel that lack of punishment for people who conduct traitorous acts in America that started with that, they really touched on that with Vice, to how Rumsfeld, Cheney, they were all Nixonites. And after Nixon did what he did with Watergate and that whole controversy there, again, they weren't exiled. They were just allowed to get right back into politics. Anybody who was involved with Nixon, I feel, should have been just exiled from politics. You were never allowed back. But yeah, that policy where these people aren't adequately exiled allows them to linger, and then the problems just re-arise. And I feel like, a lot of people who are following the Trump thing, I think that's going to happen again. And we've already seen it with Sean Spicer, where, he was allowed to come and make a joke on the enemies. Like, why are you allowing this person to continue to linger around after they've done all these horrible things, lied to the American people, but they're not adequately exiled? I feel like that's a trend that dates back to the Civil War, where, these people committed treason. They should have been hanged, but they were allowed to integrate back into American society. And it's a big problem that America's never addressed. I thought that was laid out here some.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I kind of disagree, in the sense that, they portray them as the reason that they got back in is because they weren't tight with Nixon, right? He got sent off to Brussels, and so they're looking for Republicans who aren't close to Nixon. But the thing is that people actually were punished during, Scooter Libby did go to jail. He was then pardoned. You're totally right. But the Enron executives went to jail. Who went to jail? That was everybody's big complaint about the financial crisis. Who the freak went to jail for that? But they actually put the CEO and the CFO of Enron in jail. I actually think this was sort of the last time anybody did get punished for anything.
But were they punished adequately, I should say?
Yes, I think jail is punishment. Although I think the ultimate punishment for Trump would be to put Ivanka and Jared in jail.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't think jail is adequate. G. Gordon Liddy went to jail, but then he got out and he's commenting on policy and stuff in Fox News. They weren't let's just suppose this to black drug lords. Let's do somebody in D.C., Rayful Edmond, a very famous black drug lord in the 80s. When he was doing his dirt and he had this huge drug empire, really fueled the crack epidemic in D.C. that made it the murder capital of America. When they arrested him, they also got his mother just for being aware of it. She was not really involved in the drug trade, but they locked her up and gave her multiple decades in jail.
That's effed up. You arrest a man's mama? Come on now.
Yeah. They arrest his mom, throw decades at her, and then he eventually, turned state witness. So, juxtapose that to where, if you're this black drug dealer, they arrest everyone in your family. Everybody goes away for decades if you don't cooperate. But you're looking at G. Gordon Liddy and he does 5 years. Oh, that's adequate. He went to jail. Isn't that the same thing?
Okay, no, it's not. But two wrongs don't make a right in that scenario.
But to compare selling drugs to selling out your country.
No, totally. I'm just saying nobody's mama should be arrested, not Jordan Liddy's or this guy's. I actually think let's take that off the table. I don't disagree with you. It's an injustice, but I'm the fix isn't to arrest everybody else's mama on top of it.
Okay.
It's an interesting thing, and I know. My father used to say, jail schmail, I want penury. I want them poor. Seize 100% of their assets. I want them poor. That's what's going to hit them the hardest. If they have their money to come home to, how bad off are they ever really going to be?
Quick aside, I saw in The Hill, which is a political publication, a newspaper, and they also do online. There was somebody talking about how that we need to bring back exile as a possible punishment, which I thought was an injustice.
Sending people to Mexico and then making them ask for refugee status does seem like a fitting punishment for some people. On the other hand, I've been to Mexico and it's great. So maybe no, maybe the Sudan. Okay, well, so wrapping it all up, this is really a tough one for me. I almost don't know how to give it a social impact score, so I'm going to make you go first.
I would say I would give it a social impact score of a 3. I mean,
really?
It's getting mixed reviews. The critics really dislike it for reasons we've already covered on the podcast, so I don't think it's going to get a lot of traction.
I'm not sure, though. Like, I think you're right. Like, it speaks to a few things that are going to stick with people, so I might say that it has a bigger impact than that. Because people are seeing it. I mean, it's not like it's being ignored. It's going to get some Oscar buzz, I think. So I'm going to give it up to a 5. I think people are going to come away with a little bit of the wrong idea, unfortunately. But it will have an impact.
Okay.
You have some recommendations for the week? I'll go first. So, if I don't say it enough on this podcast, So one of the things that super fascinates me, which isn't surprising given what I chose to devote my life to, is like money and economic decisions and how people spend money. And I get very far down rabbit holes. So I am recommending the podcast, The Dream. It's a really in-depth look at multi-level marketing and why it keeps sucking people in. And it's good. Like, it actually presents people who are fans of it. It's not unbiased, and it wears its bias on its sleeve so you can see it, but I just binged the thing. I was so into it. It's so interesting to me. So I strongly recommend checking that out. Garrett over here is laughing at me because he knows I'm like the most anti-MLM and I rail about it all the time. But the podcast is actually more balanced than I normally am.
I have a couple of recommendations. The first, both of them are like good companion pieces to Vice itself. So the first was Buying the War, which is a short documentary from Bill Moyers of PBS. It was released about 11 or 12 years ago. And it really covers the media's complicity in the launching of the Iraq War and how they basically just served as the White House propaganda arm for a year leading up to the war. They show you everything from, Phil Donahue and how he was canceled by MSNBC for being anti-war. And the second is a book called The Storm Before the Storm, the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic, by author Mike Duncan. And it talks about the lead up to the collapse of the Roman Republic. And, it's interesting to read because you can see some parallels in how American society works with violence coming from income inequality in the late Roman Republic. They're being stretched thin due to wars overseas. So that's a good book as well. And you can read that and see what the parallels are between America currently and what Rome looked like before its republic collapsed.
Very cool. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Movies That Matter. Leave us a review if you did, and recommend us to your friends. Check out our website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com, and our store. And for anything that we've talked about, you can look in the show notes. If you want to reach out to Movies That Matter, leave a comment on our Facebook page or on Twitter with our tag at Movies Matter Pod. And please follow Garrett.
It's Cinema Babel. You can find that on Facebook, Letterboxd at Cinema Babel, also Instagram at Cinema Babel, and on Twitter at The Cinema Babel.
Great. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.